Marcus Thorne, a reclusive tech millionaire, returned to the sprawling suburban house he hadn't seen in 6 months only to be paralyzed by the sight of his young niece, Lily, in a state of silent, hollow-eyed terror. The rest of the pristine home, curated to perfection by his late sister's husband and his new partner, hummed with a sterile, staged tranquility that made the little girl's condition feel like a scream in a soundproof room. Why would a child be a ghost in her own mother's house? And who truly deserved to be dragged from the shadows into the unforgiving light? The silence was the first thing that struck him as wrong. Marcus, a man whose life after the military had been a fortress of controlled quiet, knew the difference between peace and a void. This was a void. He stood on the manicured lawn of the house he still owned, a property he'd insisted his sister, Clara, and her family live in mortgage-free after his first company went public. After Clara's sudden death a year ago, he'd allowed her husband, David, to stay with their daughter Lily, asking only that the child be loved and cared for. He'd been traveling, closing a series of international deals that felt more like a penance than a victory, and his calls with Lily had grown strangely brief, always mediated by David's new partner, a charismatic woman named Isabella. He used his own key, the cold brass a familiar weight in his palm. The front door swung open into a foyer that was a masterpiece of impersonal design. White orchids stood in a tall vase, their petals perfect and waxy. The air smelled of lemon polish and something vaguely floral, an artificial scent that failed to mask the house's chilling emptiness. "Lily?" he called out, his voice seeming to soak into the thick cream-colored rugs. No answer. He walked through the living room, where coffee table books were arranged in a perfect fan and not a single cushion was out of place. It was a showroom, not a home where a 6-year-old lived. A knot of ice formed in his gut. He remembered this house when Clara was alive, filled with the delightful chaos of scattered toys, the smell of baking, and Lily's bright, bubbling laughter. That memory felt like a phantom limb, an ache for a life that was no longer there. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his polished leather shoes making no sound on the plush runner. He checked the master bedroom first. It was neat, impersonal, with Isabella's expensive perfumes arranged like soldiers on a vanity. He moved to Lily's room at the end of the hall. The door was closed. He turned the knob. It was locked. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through him. He knocked softly. "Lily?" "It's Uncle Marcus," only silence answered. He knocked again, louder this time. A faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound came from within. That was it. His carefully constructed composure, the armor he wore to face the world, cracked. He stepped back and drove his shoulder into the door. The wood splintered around the lock, and the door flew inward with a sickening crash. He stopped, his heart clenched. Something wasn't right. The room was cold, the window shut tight and curtains drawn despite the warm afternoon sun. It was stripped almost bare. The vibrant, animal-themed wallpaper Clara had so lovingly put up was peeling in one corner. The large, fluffy rug was gone, replaced by the cold, bare floorboards. A small cot stood against the far wall, covered with a single, thin gray blanket. And on that cot, curled into a tight ball, was Lily. She was so small, so much smaller than he remembered. Her hair, once a cascade of sunny blonde curls, was lank and dull. She wore a faded t-shirt that hung off her bony shoulders. But it was her eyes that broke him. When she looked up, her blue eyes, once so full of light, were vast and empty, like a winter sky. They held no recognition, only a deep, ingrained fear. In her small hand, she clutched a broken crayon. On the floor beside the cot were a few pieces of paper, covered in frantic, dark scribbles. He saw a small figure, again and again, trapped inside a dark box, while a large, smiling stick figure with sharp teeth stood outside. He knelt, his knees protesting on the hard wood. "Lily," he whispered, his voice thick with a grief and rage so profound it felt like drowning. She flinched, pulling the thin blanket tighter around herself. She didn't make a sound. The silent victim, trapped in a cage built of polished floors and smiling lies. He made a quiet, unbreakable vow in that cold, silent room. It was not a vow of vengeance, not yet. It was a vow of protection, a promise to the ghost of his sister and to the terrified child before him. He would become a shield. He would uncover the truth that festered beneath the surface of this perfect home. He scooped Lily into his arms. She was terrifyingly light, a bundle of fragile bones. She stiffened for a moment. Then, as if some dormant memory of his scent or the familiar feel of his arms surfaced, she went limp, burying her face in his neck. He held her, rocking gently, his mind a storm of cold, calculated fury. Just then, he heard the front door open downstairs, followed by the sound of bright, cheerful laughter. "We're home, sweetie." Isabella's voice, a melodic, confident sound that now seemed grotesque, echoed up the stairs. A moment later, she and David appeared in the shattered doorway, their smiles freezing on their faces. Isabella was beautiful, impeccably dressed, her face a mask of shocked concern. David, a man Marcus had once considered a friend, looked pale and flustered. "Marcus, what on earth is going on? What did you do to the door?" Isabella demanded, her voice sharp with accusation. "I was worried," Marcus said, his tone dangerously level. "The door was locked." "Of course it was," she said, forcing a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "It's for her own good. Lily. She's been having these terrible tantrums, destroying her things. We're trying a new method, a quiet time approach. Her therapist recommended it. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, it was almost believable." David nodded in frantic agreement. "She's a very troubled child, Marcus. She hasn't been the same since Clara. Well, they were gaslighting him, using his own sister's memory as a weapon." Marcus looked down at the child in his arms, a child who wasn't throwing a tantrum but was fading away. He felt a tremor run through her small body. He looked back at them, his eyes like chips of obsidian. "Her therapist's name," he said, the words falling like stones into the silence. "I want their name and number. Now." Isabella's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. I'll have to find the card. It's in my purse." Marcus didn't move. He just stared, letting the weight of his silence press down on them. He knew there was no therapist. There was only this cold room and their cold, calculated cruelty. He carried Lily downstairs, past the perfect orchids and the staged living room. He went into the kitchen, which was gleaming and spotless. He opened the refrigerator, a massive stainless steel unit filled with organic produce, gourmet cheeses, and bottles of expensive wine. In the back, on a lower shelf, he found a single, sad-looking container of yogurt and a browning apple. He took out a carton of milk and a loaf of bread. He gently set Lily down on a chair at the large kitchen island. Her feet dangled high above the floor. He poured her a small glass of milk and made her a simple sandwich, cutting off the crusts the way Clara used to. He placed it in front of her. She stared at it, her eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe it was for her. Then, her hands shaking, she picked up a piece of the sandwich and took a tiny bite. She chewed slowly, methodically, then took another and another, eating with a desperate, silent hunger that tore at his soul. Isabella and David watched from the doorway, their faces a mixture of fear and indignation. "You're undermining our authority, Marcus," David finally said, trying to sound firm. Marcus didn't even look at him. He watched Lily finish the sandwich and drink the milk. Then he quietly took the plate and glass to the sink. "I'm taking her with me for a few days," he announced, his back still to them. "She needs a change of scenery." "You can't do that," Isabella protested. "We're her legal guardians." Marcus turned slowly, his 6'3" frame seeming to fill the entire kitchen. "This is my house, Isabella," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge of steel. "You are living here at my discretion. And Lily is my blood. She is my niece. I am taking her. If you try to stop me, I will call the police and show them her room and that broken door. We can let them decide what's happening here." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. David's face went white. Isabella's eyes narrowed with venom, but she said nothing. Marcus knew he had won the first battle. He picked Lily up again, and this time, she wrapped her thin arms around his neck and held on tight. As he walked out the front door, leaving the shattered bedroom door and the two silent figures behind, he knew the war was just beginning. He took Lily to his own home, a minimalist penthouse apartment overlooking the city, a place of glass and steel and quiet order. It was the antithesis of the warm, chaotic home Clara had made, but it was safe. He set her up in the guest room, a room with a soft bed, a thick rug, and a window that looked out at the endless sky. He bought her new clothes, soft pajamas, and a mountain of art supplies. For the first few days, she barely spoke. She communicated through her drawings. The dark, scribbled boxes appeared again. But now, sometimes, a new figure would be there. A tall, broad-shouldered man standing outside the box, his hand outstretched. Marcus sat with her for hours, not pressing her to talk, just being present. He learned the landscape of her fear. The way she flinched at sudden noises, the way she would hide food in her pockets, the way she would stare into space, her small face a mask of sorrow. His investigation began in earnest. He hired a private investigator, a former colleague from his military intelligence days, to dig into Isabella's past. He also started his own, more subtle inquiries. He remembered an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a woman who had been close with Clara and had always kept a watchful eye on the neighborhood from her front porch. He went to see her one afternoon, finding her tending her roses. At first, she was reluctant to speak, her eyes darting nervously toward the house next door. "They're very private people," she said, snipping a dead bloom from a bush. "Mrs. Gable," Marcus said gently, "I'm worried about Lily. Please, you knew my sister. You know how much she loved that little girl." The old woman's face softened with sadness. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "It's not my place," she began, then stopped. She looked at Marcus, at the genuine pain and concern in his eyes. "The shouting," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I hear him shouting. Richard, that's what she calls him. Terrible temper. And the crying, Lily's crying. It used to be loud, but lately, it's just quiet. That's almost worse, isn't it? When they stop crying." She told him of days when the expensive cars would be gone for the entire weekend, and she never saw Lily in the yard. She'd seen delivery drivers leave food on the porch that would sit there for hours. She was afraid of Richard, of the way he looked at her, the cold dismissal in his eyes. She was just an old woman. What could she do? Marcus thanked her, his resolve hardening into something sharp and dangerous. Her words were another piece of the puzzle, confirmation of the neglect his gut had screamed about. The real breakthrough, however, came from a place he least expected it. While sorting through some of Clara's old things he'd stored in his apartment, he found a box of her electronics. Inside, tucked away in its original packaging, was a high-end nanny cam, one shaped like a teddy bear. He remembered her buying it when Lily was a baby, a new mother's small paranoia. He had a sudden, gut-wrenching thought. Had she ever installed it? Was it possible it was still there, hidden in plain sight? He called his head of security, a tech genius who could bypass Fort Knox. "I need you to get something for me," he said, discreetly. That night, under the cover of darkness, his man slipped into the house. It was a risk, but one Marcus had to take. An hour later, he had it. The small, unassuming teddy bear sat on his desk, its plastic eyes seeming to stare at him. His tech expert worked for another hour, pulling data from the encrypted internal memory card. Finally, he nodded at Marcus. "You're not going to like what you see, sir." He was right. The video files were a timeline of escalating horror. It started with neglect. Hours and hours of Lily left alone in her room. Then came the verbal abuse, mostly from Richard. He would loom over her, his voice a venomous hiss, calling her stupid, lazy, a waste of space. Isabella was often there, a passive observer, sometimes chiming in with a sigh of exasperation, telling Lily to stop being so difficult. They took away her toys, her books, one by one, as punishment for imagined slights. And then there it was, the moment that would become the core of his righteous fury. The footage was date-stamped just 3 days before he had arrived. Lily was standing by her locked door, her small voice trembling. "Mommy, please," she pleaded, her small hands flat against the wood. "I'm too hungry. My tummy hurts." Isabella's voice came from the other side, cold and impatient. "You had a snack 2 hours ago, Lily. Stop being so dramatic. You'll get dinner when you learn to behave." The video showed Lily sliding down the door, curling into a ball, her silent sobs shaking her entire body. Marcus watched it 3 times, each viewing fueling the Arctic rage building inside him. This was the weapon he needed. This was their smiling public facade stripped away, revealing the rotten core beneath. The investigators' report arrived the next morning. Isabella had a history of latching onto wealthy men, a trail of debt and broken relationships behind her. Richard, whose real name was Richard Sterling, was even worse. He was a con man, a predator who specialized in charming vulnerable, wealthy women. He had multiple fraud allegations against him in other states, but he'd always managed to slip away before charges could be made concrete. He was draining the inheritance David had received from Clara, laundering it through a series of shell corporations disguised as charitable foundations. Their biggest one, the Foundation for Children's Futures, was hosting a major fundraising gala in 2 weeks. It was their crown jewel, the source of their social standing and a brilliant cover for their crimes. The irony was so grotesque it made him sick. He knew what he had to do. This couldn't be a quiet, private affair. Their power came from their public image. He had to destroy it publicly and completely. He called his oldest friend, David Chun, a man he'd served with in the Special Forces who was now one of the most feared corporate and criminal lawyers in the country. They met in Marcus's office, the city lights glittering below. Marcus didn't say a word, he just played the video. Chan, a man Marcus had once seen remain perfectly calm under enemy fire, watched with a stony expression, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. When the video ended, he was silent for a full minute. "How many laws have they broken?" Marcus asked, his voice low. "All of them," Chen replied, his voice grim. "Criminal negligence, child endangerment, unlawful imprisonment, extortion, fraud. It's a long list. We give this to the DA. They're gone for a decade or more." "Good," Marcus said. "But I want more than that. I want them exposed. I want everyone who ever shook their hands and praised their charity to see what they really are. I want them to have nowhere left to hide." Chun nodded slowly, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "The gala," he said. "It's the perfect stage." They spent the next 2 weeks planning, every detail meticulously arranged. Chun filed the initial reports with Child Protective Services and the district attorney's office, providing them with the evidence but asking them to hold off on making any arrests. He explained the plan, and the DA, seeing the high-profile nature of the case and the irrefutable proof, agreed. This needed to be a public execution. During that time, Isabella and Richard, sensing they were losing control, made their move. They filed a temporary restraining order against Marcus, claiming he was an unstable, grieving relative who had kidnapped their child. It was a desperate, arrogant gambit, an attempt to paint him as the villain and reassert their narrative. Chun dealt with it easily, presenting just enough preliminary evidence to a judge in a closed hearing to have the order thrown out and a temporary emergency custody order granted to Marcus. It was a minor skirmish, but it showed Marcus just how confident they were in their own lies. They truly believed they were untouchable, that arrogance would be their downfall. The night of the gala arrived. The ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel was a sea of jewels and champagne. Isabella was radiant in a shimmering silver gown, Richard dapper and charming in a tailored tuxedo. They moved through the crowd, accepting accolades and donations for their fraudulent foundation. They were at the apex of their power, bathed in the adoring glow of the city's elite. Richard took the stage to a round of thunderous applause. He stood at the podium, a large screen behind him displaying the foundation's logo. "We are here tonight for the children," he began, his voice smooth and resonant, filled with false sincerity. "For those who have no voice, who rely on our compassion, our protection. At that moment, the grand ballroom doors at the back of the room swung open. Marcus Thorne stood there, dressed in a simple, perfectly cut black suit. He was an island of stillness and silence in the glittering chaos. He began to walk forward, not hurriedly, but with a slow, deliberate pace that drew every eye in the room. A wave of whispers followed him. Richard faltered, his practiced smile tightening. "Marcus? What are you doing here?" "Security," he called, his voice losing its confident edge. Marcus didn't stop until he reached the foot of the stage. He looked up at Richard, his expression unreadable. "You talk about children who have no voice," Marcus said, his own voice quiet but amplified by the microphone, carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent room. "I'm here to give one of them hers back." He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to Chan, who was standing by the tech booth. The logo on the giant screen behind Richard vanished. It was replaced by a single, gut-wrenching sound played over the state-of-the-art speaker system. It was the small, trembling voice of a little girl. "Mommy, please. I'm too hungry. My tummy hurts." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Isabella, who had been smiling graciously near the stage, froze, her face turning ashen. Richard's eyes widened in panic. "What is this? Turn that off," he snarled. But it was too late. The video began to play. The grainy nannycam footage filled the screen, showing the cold, bare room. It showed Lily, small and alone. It showed her pleading at the door. It showed Isabella's cold, dismissive reply. The audio was crystal clear. The crowd of benefactors, of society mavens and corporate titans, stood in stunned, horrified silence. The video kept playing, a highlight reel of cruelty. Richard screaming at the child for spilling a drop of water, the two of them leaving her locked in the room as they went out for the evening, dressed in their finery. Isabella let out a choked sob and tried to run, but she was hemmed in by the horrified stares of the people who had been praising her moments before. Richard, his face purple with rage, completely lost control. His mask of charming philanthropy disintegrated, revealing the vicious monster beneath. "She's a liar," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the screen. "A manipulative, difficult child. She deserved it. All of it." His raw, ugly confession echoed through the ballroom, sealing his fate more completely than any evidence could. As if on cue, the ballroom doors opened again. This time, it was not one man, but a half-dozen uniformed police officers, accompanied by two grim-faced detectives. They moved purposefully through the stunned crowd, their path clearing as if by magic. They flanked the stage, their presence an undeniable statement of finality. One of the detectives approached a babbling, incoherent Richard, while the other gently placed a hand on Isabella's arm. She collapsed, weeping pathetically. The flash of cameras from the press, alerted by an anonymous tip from Chen's office, began to fill the room, capturing the spectacular fall from grace. Justice, swift and merciless, had arrived. The aftermath was a media firestorm. The story of the Gala of Horrors was on every news channel. The Foundation for Children's Futures was exposed as a complete sham, its accounts frozen and its founders disgraced. The legal proceedings were swift and brutal. Faced with the undeniable video evidence and a mountain of financial documents detailing their fraud, Richard and Isabella had no defense. Mrs. Gable gave a tearful, powerful statement to the police, her voice finally free of fear. Richard Sterling, for his litany of crimes against a child and his financial fraud, received a sentence that would ensure he spent the best of his remaining years behind bars. Isabella, for her complicity and criminal negligence, received a shorter but still substantial prison term, her life of glamour and deceit exchanged for a cold, sterile cell. Marcus was granted full and permanent custody of Lily. He sold the big, empty house in the suburbs, its memories now too tainted with pain. He liquidated his shares in one of his smaller companies and bought a quiet, rambling house on the coast, a place with large windows that let in the sea air and a garden that spilled over with wildflowers. The transformation in Lily was slow, but it was steady. The silence that had enveloped her began to recede, replaced first by whispered, one-word answers, then by hesitant sentences. The haunted look in her eyes was gradually supplanted by a cautious curiosity. She still had nightmares, but Marcus was always there, ready to hold her and whisper that she was safe, that she would always be safe. He learned to bake lopsided cookies with her, to build magnificent sandcastles that were immediately claimed by the tide, and to listen, truly listen, to the quiet rhythm of her healing heart. One sunny afternoon, about a year after the gala, Marcus found her sitting at the small wooden table on their porch, drawing with a set of new, brightly colored crayons. He came to stand behind her, looking over her shoulder. It was a picture of their house by the sea. In the garden stood two figures. One was a tall man with broad shoulders. The other was a small girl with bright yellow hair. They were holding hands. And above them, filling the top of the page, was a huge, brilliant sun, its rays reaching down to touch them both. She had not drawn a box. She had not drawn any shadows. Lily turned and looked up at him, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time. She held the drawing up to him. "For you," she said, her voice clear and strong. He took the piece of paper, his throat tight with emotion. He knew he would frame it and hang it where he could see it every day. It was a testament not to his strength, but to hers. It was a symbol of her long journey out of the darkness. In the end, evil often wears a charming mask, hiding its true face behind polished words and public benevolence. It thrives in the shadows of our assumptions, preying on the vulnerable under the guise of authority and care. But the quiet strength of a protector, the unwavering resolve of one good person to stand against the dark, can be enough to tear that mask away. True power is not found in dominance or deception, but in the fierce, unrelenting compassion that gives a voice to the voiceless and a shield to the defenseless. It reminds us that the brightest lights are often lit in the darkest of rooms. Have you ever witnessed a situation where your intuition told you something was deeply wrong, even when everything on the surface looked perfect? I'd be honored to read your stories in the comments below. Thank you for sharing this journey with me, and may you always have the courage to be a light for someone in the darkness.